Hello everybody, welcome to Also Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and give us a like. That helps us do much better on the algorithm, so it's much appreciated. Also, check us out over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you want to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. We're back with NBA news. We missed it last week, so this should be a relatively stuffed one. It is still the off-season, dead of the off-season, so there's not that much, but we got a good couple of stories to tell you about today. First and foremost, there are some trade rumors out there, mainly that Robert Williams could potentially be going to the New York Knicks. They don't have Isaiah Hartenstein anymore, and Mitchell Robinson is a guy who has injury concerns. He hasn't really been consistently healthy at any point in his career, and even when he is actually healthy, he does have a lot of limitations to his game. So getting someone like Robert Williams would be nice. However, I do think it's a little odd that given that Mitchell Robinson and injury is a big concern, they would then get Robert Williams as though that's also not a concern for him. Like, it's better to have two injury risk big men rather than one, because theoretically at least one of them can be healthy at any given time. I do understand though that this does come from a place of you're probably, in terms of actual value for a player on the team, Robert Williams is about as much bang for your buck as you're going to get, because he probably does not have a ton of trade value as a result of his injury issues. But, you know, if you manage to get him relatively healthy for not even really a first round pick, like some sort of contract that you don't value too much, I'm not really sure who on the Knicks is making that amount of money that you would feel comfortable throwing away, but I'm sure you can find it. Robert Williams makes $12 million a year. They could, I guess, trade a bunch of contracts to get that money to work, but like everybody who makes 10 plus million, you want to keep. And the person who makes 5, which is Miles McBride, you also want to keep that guy. So, you know, Dante, Mitchell, Hart, McCall, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle, OG Anunoby. It's funny that OG is the highest paid player on this team. I never even considered that for the Jalen Brunson contract, because he took that pay cut. He's going to be making less money than OG for their entire tenure there. That's crazy. I understand that happening initially, just given the timing of the contracts, but that also happening with the extension. I appreciate that he did that, I guess. I hope the Knicks did too. But yeah, I don't know how they're going to pull that trade off in terms of making the money work, but something to look out for. I'm sure it's possible. Maybe there's a trade exception involved. Maybe the Knicks have something up their sleeve. I don't fucking know. But the Knicks could potentially trade for Robert Williams as another center option. Jimmy Butler and the Warriors is another thing that has been rumored. They have possibly made some trade calls. This makes sense to me in terms of players who are star level but could potentially be on the move in the next couple of years. I think Jimmy Butler is up there. I don't know how much longer the Miami Heat not trying in the regular season experiment is going to continue on. There's also, of course, the timeline factor here. I don't know that the Warriors would be too interested in trading for some like super young player, because it makes it harder to trade for them given that value, but also Stephen Curry being at the age of 36, you're probably going to want somebody who is, you know, they don't need to be old necessarily, but someone who would fit in well with him. You know, he doesn't have to make it work with someone a decade younger than him. It makes sense. I think the fit would be fine. Allows Steph to play more off ball. He's had to go more and more on ball in the past couple of years because of the roster's lack of quality by comparison to the past. I do fear what Jimmy and Draymond Green would look like offensively. The floor spacing there, pretty awful, especially if you're also going to put out another 5 who can't really shoot. So you'd have 3 players who really are not three-point shooting threats on the floor. That's not really great. However, if they can get him for a relatively cheap price relative to the amount of talent that he brings to the table, I say go for it. The headlining story of today is ESPN's Zach Lowe says it is hard to find people who are optimistic about the Milwaukee Bucks ahead of the 2024-2025 season. It's very easy to find people around the league who are like, it's over, just move on. He said this on his Low Post podcast recently. Like, start thinking about the next steps of the Bucks franchise, whatever, transition. Yeah, that is something that I do understand. I feel split on the Milwaukee Bucks because the on-paper team is still very good. I think something that a lot of people are not taking into consideration is that Chris Middleton is pretty much as good as he has been before. Now, his regular season stats haven't held up as much just because he's had a reduced role, of course, but in terms of the playoffs, in terms of his ability to turn it on at the right time, these last 2 years, obviously it's just 11 games, but 24 points and 25 points per game on really good efficiency. Not as great shooting from three in the previous year, but hey, I think Chris Middleton's still capable of playing like an all-star level player. Obviously, Damian Lillard still is, even if he has fallen off to an extent. And Giannis just had the best season of his fucking career. Where people probably get a lot of their concern is in the fact that they are coached by Doc Rivers and in the fact that they're not exactly the deepest team in the world. And another factor, age is of concern. Damian Lillard is going to be 33-34 going into next season. Chris Middleton's in a similar ballpark. I believe Brook Lopez is about 36 years old. So how many years they have left to actually make this roster work is up in the air. If they don't get it done in the next year or two, I doubt they probably ever will. So there is reason to be pessimistic, but also I feel like the fact that the Bucks were a overall pretty good team, all things considered, last year, in spite of all of the shit that went against their favor, inconsistent lineups, inconsistent Damian Lillard, him adjusting to that new environment, the coaching situation changing throughout the year, the fact that Damian Lillard got traded there like right before training camp started. So like in terms of their game plan going into the season, that was dramatically messed with in a very short-term basis. And going into next year, he's been on the team for a full year now. There was also some personal stuff happening behind the scenes that I don't know if it's over with, but it should at least not be fresh and new and happening at the perfectly wrong time. So I think they'll be better. But if you're saying, sure, they might be better, but I don't see a world where they're on par with the Celtics. I don't really see a world where they're on par with the Knicks or even the 76ers. I could understand that point of view. I have been saying a lot about the Milwaukee Bucks pretty much anytime I talk about them, so I apologize if you've heard this talking point before, but if Giannis was just utilized more as a big, which I recognize isn't always his strongest skill set, but I think would be where he is most optimized, and you allowed Damian Lillard to do more ball handling, more on-ball shot creation rather than spacing the floor for Giannis, I think Dame would be better. And Giannis's stats would drop a little bit, but he'd probably be a more effective and more efficient while being a lower usage player, which is another point I like to harp on all the time, that usage has a threshold where it gets too high and your team is worse for it. And Giannis had one of the highest usage percentages in the entire NBA last year. I still think he should be up there in that category, but not to the extreme that he has been historically for the Bucks, and especially not to the extreme that he was last year when he already had like at least a guy who theoretically should be superstar level help. Like, it's one thing if Chris Middleton's hurt all the time and Drew Holiday is a very inconsistent offensive player. It's another if you have Damian fucking Lillard on the roster. Giannis really doesn't need to dictate the offense to the degree that he does, especially in the regular seasons. A lot of that was him carrying through poor fit, but I also think that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're going, okay, the way we were doing this wasn't working, I'm just going to go back to the default way that we used to do things, where we just carry, and just hope that that's going to work. I understand why you would have the impulse to go to that approach. However, if you fall back on that approach so easily without being willing to deal with any growing pains, then how are you ever actually going to see if anything else works? I think I understand where it's coming from, and I understand why Giannis takes the approach that he does, but if you want your teammates to be really good, they need to have the opportunity to improve and understand the system as the season is going along. I'm not blaming that entirely or even mostly on Giannis, but it is a huge factor that I think is the biggest thing holding them back. I'm actually not as concerned about the age. I'm not too concerned about the injury stuff. I also personally don't feel that a couple of years ago, like I think the season or two after their championship run, it was 22 or 23. I believe Brook ended up being second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, just behind Jaren Jackson Jr. And Jaren Jackson Jr. and him were pretty much the only real candidates for the award that season. But since then, a lot of my negative opinions on Brook Lopez have pretty much held up. Like the fact that he, while someone who does take a good amount of threes, doesn't actually have the defense's respect to some like super high degree. 36% on decent volume the past couple of years. Really, if you look at his entire Milwaukee tenure, he's shooting 35% from three. Like, that's not bad. It's certainly not bad, especially, well, I also don't really like the especially for Brook Lopez argument or especially for a center argument, because I think that is counterintuitive in many ways, where the defense is going to respect your three or they're not. They're not going to say, well, he shoots well for a center, so I guess we have to defend him. And if you look at their playoff runs, you look at what he shot from three. Actually, he shot pretty well in the last two first-round series. I didn't recognize that. But as a whole, over the 46 games he has played with them after the first 2 years, so from like the championship year onward, 33% from three. His minutes also tend to go down, especially throughout the 2021 playoffs, saw his minutes get reduced more and more. In fact, if we go to game logs 2021, you'll see here in this Phoenix series, 22 minutes, 21 minutes, 19 minutes. There are just some games towards the end here. There was some stuff against the Hawks as well, where he was getting into the lower 20s. Obviously, there's also games where he's doing better, and part of that was, actually, I think this game 7, he was actually pretty great against the Brooklyn Nets. But anyways, the point that I'm arriving at, I don't actually think Brook Lopez is necessarily as integral to this team's success. When they won the championship in 2021, their best lineup was Giannis at the center position with PJ Tucker at power forward. So what I actually really have strongly advocated for is I think they should trade Bobby Portis for a more ideal 3-and-D forward who plays the 4 position preferably, but someone who, Bobby Portis is a good player, but I don't really think his skill set is a top priority in terms of what Milwaukee needs. So someone who could replicate the role that PJ Tucker had on that Bucks team would make a huge difference for this team. And I think the fact that they don't have that has been a bigger hindrance than people have given it credit. Overall, I feel more optimistic about the Bucks than I think most people do, but I understand having a negative position on them. There's definitely a lot of reasons to not think very highly of them, but I've been yapping about that enough. Let's move on to some smaller roster moves. Landry Shamet and the New York Knicks have agreed to a 1-year contract. He's a pretty damn good three-point shooter, or at least he is supposed to be. He won our all-rookie second team in his first year because of his three-point shooting. Since then, he really hasn't been quite the same as a shooter, and his year with Washington wasn't very strong. But as a whole, he's a career 38% three-point shooter on pretty good volume. Doesn't do a whole lot besides for that. Maybe the occasional nice pass here or there, but for cheap, getting someone who is that good at shooting the three in the NBA is nothing to complain about. After a very long, drawn-out process, Isaac Okoro has agreed to a 3-year, $38 million contract with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think this is a steal and a half. I don't really know what the fuck went wrong with Isaac Okoro this offseason, because I feel like he was easily deserving of more than $12 to $13 million a season. He's one of the best defensive players in the entire NBA, or at least perimeter defensive players. And then he shot 39% from three. The volume isn't anything crazy. It could definitely be higher, no doubt. That's a good enough percentage for also being an excellent defender. I guess the other part of it is that he's really a small small forward, but he's putting emphasis on small because he's 6'5", so that's maybe a little bit of a hindrance as well. But I feel like there are so many teams in the league that should have wanted Okoro's services, but I guess they didn't. This might end up being one of the better valued contracts in the entire NBA. The only way that really wouldn't be the case is if the three ball wasn't real, if he just had one good year and then he's going to struggle with that the rest of his career, then I would understand it. But I think he shot consistently well long enough throughout the year that he should have got more than 12 mil a year. Who's Koloko? Who's this guy? Is this the new Bruno Caboclo? The Lakers added a big man, I guess. This is not a small contract news. Joel Embiid and the Sixers actually agreed to a 1-year, $193 million contract extension. 1 year? Holy shit, yeah, that'd be crazy. A 3-year, $193 million extension, excuse me. I did the math on that. I was on a treadmill when I saw that pop up on ESPN on the TV at my apartment gym. But I did the math, 193 divided by 3, 64 a year. I'm imagining probably at the end of that contract, it's getting into the 70s, if I had to guess, because it's not like they're going a flat rate every single year. It usually goes up each year. So basically until 2030, Joel Embiid should be a Philadelphia 76er. That's interesting to me because throughout Embiid's career, there has been people pretty consistently being like, yeah, this guy's going to be really good for like 5 years, and then it's just inevitable that injuries are going to catch up to him and he's going to fall off a cliff. But he was 29 last year, he's going to be 30 this year, and the Sixers seem to feel pretty confident that he can at least be good when he does play, even if he does regularly not play more than like 65 games. In terms of his actual ability when he's there, I'm really not all that sure that he's not going to be an extremely productive 33-year-old. I'm rather convinced he will be, actually. Sure, he's been an injury-prone guy throughout his career, but he's never really been like, I don't know, like he's never been bad or fallen off because of his injuries, other than like in specific settings, specifically the NBA playoffs. That only makes sense. It's not like the Sixers have much better else to do. Fair enough. Harry Giles agrees to a camp deal with the Charlotte Hornets. I'm sure that Nicholas Henkel will be very happy with that because, man, he loves Harry Giles. AJ Griffin and the Rockets agree to a contract buyout amid retirement talk. I think we touched on the retirement thing in the last news one, but yeah, apparently he's retiring because the Rapture is coming, which no one's ever incorrectly predicted when the Rapture was coming, so I'm sure he's got it. I'm sure AJ Griffin, he's the guy who figured it out, so good for him, I guess. As for some, we keep updating this, available free agent still. Robert Covington, I think, could still contribute pretty well to a couple of teams. Danilo Gallinari is a scoring presence. Markelle Fultz is a really sad one. I don't know that he's going to be getting another contract. Justin Holiday's good three-point shooter. That's always going to get you a spot at some point. I imagine he will. Dennis Smith Jr., I don't really think. He had a stretch with the Charlotte Hornets where his defense was really good and then his offense was tolerable. But in Brooklyn, the defense wasn't as good and the offense was far less tolerable. So I understand why he's not under a contract right now. And as Rudy has pointed out here, apparently according to Bleacher Report, Nasir Little doesn't count. I think that makes some sense if you're just such a poor offensive player, even if he is theoretically a good defensive player. The NBA announces rule change to expand replay on out-of-bounds call for the 2025 season. The review change could have come into play at least once in last season's playoffs when Dallas's Kyrie Irving fouled Minnesota's Jaden McDaniels as the ball went out of bounds. No foul was called on the play, and even though the review clearly showed Irving hitting McDaniels' arm, the ball was awarded to Dallas because it went out off of McDaniels. When such out-of-bounds plays have reviews triggered by coaches' challenges now, on-court officials and the NBA Replay Center will be able to review the video to determine whether a foul proximate to the violation should have been called, the league said, providing that certain criteria are met. So yeah, I think this is largely a good thing. This is something that has been complained about a good amount of times. It's like, we have the technology to replay this. Why have we determined that this is the barrier that we don't allow to actually use that technology. I understand from the league's perspective that they're trying to speed up the game, have less downtime between moments, not have moments where you're like, nothing's happening for 3 minutes because they're like intently replaying this thing. As much as that might suck and as much as that might hinder the viewer experience, I think the integrity of the officiating is more important than that. And if you can do some pretty basic things such as this to improve upon that integrity, to get less accusations of being a rigged league, I think as a whole that is for the better. Ex-Suns employee seeks $60 million in damages in a discrimination complaint. Miss Tristan filed a formal complaint due to ongoing racial discrimination, harassment, and retaliation she experienced while employed with the Phoenix Suns. Specifically, Miss Tristan endured overt racist comments in a hostile work environment that went unaddressed despite having reported to HR and exclusive executive leadership. This is something that we actually made a main channel video on a while ago, not about this specific case, but if you were not aware, Phoenix Suns owner Robert Sarver was a racist and misogynistic monster who had the misfortune of having to sell his franchise for like $1 billion. Real punishment right there. But yeah, he was horrific and a terrible owner, and there was never any repercussions for his behavior until finally enough of it was compiled into one damning article that was able to bring the guy down. But yeah, I'm not surprised that the Suns are still seeing fallout from this, and I hope that this woman gets her money because, you know, fuck that. Don't be racist, in my opinion, at least. I don't know if that's a hot take. Sometimes it is. You know, I made a video about Doc Rivers, and everybody was like, well, he got hired because he's black. So I don't know. I guess they're the Brooklyn Nets now. They were the New Jersey Nets when he was there. Vince Carter's number 15 jersey is going to be retired. That's interesting to me. I don't know. I guess they don't have a lot of great players throughout their franchise's history who deserve a spot anyway, so I guess fair enough. I feel like there's probably been somebody who's worn number 15 since then, but yeah, Vince is one of their best players in franchise history. He just wasn't there that long, and he probably only had like 2 to 3 years of actually playing at a truly like superstar tier level. He was there for 4.5 seasons, 25-point per game scorer for 2 of them, an all-star for 2 of them, not even top 15 in MVP voting. So I think for most franchises, this is not enough to get your jersey in the rafters, but fair enough. Dwayne Wade to become the first Heat player honored with a statue outside of Miami's arena. That only makes sense. That only makes sense. Who else would be the first? Adrian Wojnarowski retires to be the GM of his alma mater team's men's basketball team. I think this is awesome for him. I'm curious how this will change the NBA landscape in general, but I personally tend to have a lot of respect for people who retire early when they can. I don't understand when people who make a shitload of money doing a job that essentially gives them 0 actual life just do that until they're in the grave. I'm looking at you, Skip Bayless. It's just a very weird choice to me. It's up to you. It's your personal decision. But for me, anytime I hear about a guy being like, yeah, I'm cashing out, I'm going to spend more time with my family, and I'll do this other job that doesn't take up nearly as much time as constantly being on the clock reporting news does, that sounds like it's for the better to me. And good for him in that regard. Rudy becomes 1 year older. We are, of course, talking about NBA Rudy, the producer behind this channel and co-owner, of course. Happy birthday. He is 29.
Happy birthday. It's your birthday.
And wrapping up a last bit of news here. Mitchell Wiggins passed away at the age of 64. He played a couple of years in the NBA for the Houston Rockets. His career peaking in 1990 when he averaged 15 points per game. Based on what Basketball Reference is telling me, I remember him being I remember him being one of those dudes who was really caught up in drug problems in the NBA, but 64 ain't a bad age, especially for somebody who's tall. The NBA is targeting the 78-78 season for expansion teams to begin playing. I think that's a pretty good timeline. Makes sense. Mitchell Robinson not ready for the season opener, not going to recover, not yet recovered from a surgery he got in May, and partially because of that and because the lineup makes some sense to experiment with, Tom Thibodeau plans to give Julius Randle more minutes at the center position. That'll be interesting. I do think that that could actually work against a lot of NBA teams for a lot of minutes, but like when you're playing the Sixers, I don't think you can get away with Julius Randle as Joel Embiid's matchup. So it's not something you're going to be able to employ a lot, but it's something that Tibbs has never done historically, so the fact that he's open to it is saying quite a bit. And the NBA City Edition Nike jerseys for this season have been leaked. Kings jersey's cool. Spurs jersey is cool. I feel like they already had that. The Rip City jersey is just a fucking remake of the one from last year. Suns jersey's good. OKC's jersey's good. Utah's jersey's good. This Clippers jersey's extremely generic. I cannot believe the Timberwolves are doing this fucking horrible ice look that they did last year again. I thought that was awful. I cannot believe they're doing that again. New Orleans jersey is ugly. The Wizards one's an improvement, but also still ugly. I like the Memphis jersey. I like the Rockets one. Warriors one is interesting. It's got a nice bit of flair of the old colors, but also a more modern spin. Lakers jersey's cool. This Raptors one, for me, it depends heavily on the placement of the jersey number, because this like spot right here, you can't see my cursor, but the spot right below the Nike jersey, if the number is not there, I think it'll look weird because that's just a big blank spot. Bucks jersey's cool. I hate the Denver Nuggets fucking elevation number jerseys. Those are terrible. I don't think it works. Mavs jersey's fine. The Bulls jersey has literally no blue in it or red in it because reasons, I suppose. The paint Indiana jersey's fine. Sixers jersey's cool. Magic jersey's fine. I actually really like this Pistons jersey, which I rarely say that. Pistons jerseys usually suck. Cavs jersey's nice. Nets jersey's cool. Knicks jersey's cool. What am I missing? Celtics one looks like a practice jersey. Hawks jersey's cool. And I cannot believe the Heat are doing the Heat culture thing again. I think I also missed the Hornets jersey. I'm not a big fan of that color, but it's not a bad jersey. Yeah, that was your NBA news. Shout out to Nick for editing this video, and goodbye.